All right, today we're gonna talk about some training tools, when and why I might choose a specific tool for a specific dog or scenario, as well as some pros and cons of each one of these tools to kind of help make them make sense. And I'm gonna try to move the best I can from least adverse to most adversive tool. Basically, what's gonna give the dog the least amount of pressure, what's gonna give the dog the most amount of pressure. So I have this little doggy here today to show you how some of these tools work. That way I can apply some pressure and really show you how they're hitting the dog and stuff without actually putting them on a dog. The first thing we're going to talk about is the ever beloved harness. So this is my dog's old harness. Clearly this harness does not fit this dog. This is very big, but harnesses are great. I love a harness when I want a dog to pull really hard. A lot of dog owners will reach for the harness when they're getting a new dog or they're teaching their dog to walk on the leash because either, all of the cute colors are in the harnesses, of course, but it's what you see a lot of online. And then there's a lot of also gimmicky no pull harnesses. And I actually have one of these no pull harnesses here to show you. It is a pet store harness, and I'll tell you why I do not like these. First of all, we can just go ahead and get this out here. Nothing is going to teach your dog to walk on the leash except for training. This isn't gonna help you. This isn't gonna help you. Nothing is magical. We're not working miracles out here with stuff we bought on Amazon for $30. So when you see those Instagram ads of this one product will make your dog walk perfectly on the leash, all of your issues are solved, instantly in my head, I'm seeing big red scam, instantly. And even if it is temporarily helping your dog walking better on the leash, it's not helping you in the long run. What you're gonna see is either the dog is going to figure out how to work around the pressure, or you could also potentially cause some serious damage to your dog and their anatomy. And we'll talk about that actually with this harness. These are harnesses that I see put on incorrectly, like all of the time. And of course, this harness is a little bit big for this dog as well. So I'm gonna kind of hold it to fit. Really what we wanna see is the chest portion here. The harness goes around the belly, and then the leash clasps at the front with like this little martingale action right here. And the whole point of this device is the dog's walking, the dog gets in front of me, my leash will actually pull, and this harness is now tightening over here, and it'll basically flip my dog around. And usually what you see after that is the dog just figures out how to crab walk sideways, and it can also cause some serious damage to their shoulder blades. So if you actually look up images, and I'll try to put one over here, of a dog before and after using one of these harnesses for a long amount of time, you'll see their shoulder blades are starting to look a little funky. And especially for breeds or larger dogs, and typically of course it's a larger dog that you put this on, because you're not gonna have an issue as much with your 5-pound Chihuahua pulling as you will with 50, 60-pound dogs. Breeds that are already predisposed to joint issues, shoulder issues, dysplasia, stuff like that, you're now adding extra damage to things that are already prone to fail in the dog's anatomy. So you're kind of putting a Band-Aid over a giant crack in the wall, and it's not really gonna fix anything. All it's gonna do is end up causing you more issues, and it's gonna be more difficult to fix as well. But while we're on the topic of things that I don't like, and that can actually cause really serious injury to your dog, and is kind of mislabeled as a solve-all training tool, would be the head halters. So I have one somewhere. I kind of dug through my bin of contraband dog training items. That's where stuff like this lives. And I didn't see it in there. And I honestly don't want to spend that much time looking. So I'm gonna kind of throw up some pictures. I'm sure you've seen these. Essentially it goes around the dog's face like a horse halter. So I'm gonna go ahead and say this isn't perfect, but it does illustrate my point. And I'll be putting up some graphics and stuff to kind of show you what I'm talking about with the real head halter. So basically it goes around the neck, and then it's got a tightening mechanism here for it to be snug on the dog. And the issue with these is halters were great for horses because they are large animals, 1,000+ pounds, And so it's really difficult for you to actually put damage on a horse. And we're also needing a lot of leverage on a horse. I am, of course, a victim of the Horse Girl the Dog Trainer pipeline. Just about every other dog trainer I know is also a victim of the Horse Girl the Dog Trainer pipeline. So I did spend a lot of years working with horses and working with halters and stuff like that. So I have a really good understanding how they work. But the big issue when it comes to your dog is a lot smaller. Even if you've got the biggest Great Dane on the planet Earth, it is not near the size of a horse in muscles, skeleton, all of that. So basically with the head halter, the dog's walking, whatever, the dog sees a squirrel or something, it says, screw you, I'm out. This is gonna whip around and cause whiplash, and all of the pressure on this, even if the dog's not bolting out of a squirrel, because of course that's a little bit dramatic of it, and I'm not trying to be super duper dramatic on all of this stuff, but it does cause damage. Even if over time your dog starts walking like this because you never taught them how to walk on it, all of the pressure is right here. And what else is right there? The spinal cord, the brainstem, a lot of really important stuff is right in this area, and that's where all of this pressure is going. And there are absolutely some horror stories about permanent damage caused by those head halters. And that's another thing that is sold as a fix-all, get your dog to walk on the leash perfectly, and it is not. It is probably one of the most damaging tools I can think of that would be a normal item to put on a dog. And I know a lot of pet stores, because I worked at one before as the dog trainer, they want you to push this and they want you to push that head halter. And it's really not because these items do a good job. It's because these companies spend a lot of money on marketing. And I'm sure if you do enough dog stuff online, you post enough dog pictures on Instagram, you're gonna also see all of these ads for stop leash pulling now with this harness, this thing, and it's like the next new contraption and it's got like 50 leashes attached to it and it's crazy. Again, nothing fixes something that needs training other than training. And now that we've talked about that, we can talk about the tools that I do use. So we've talked about the harness. I use harnesses when I want dogs to pull. So if I'm doing protection work with a dog, I want them to pull into that harness. If I'm doing detection and I want the dog to pull me towards the odor, I'm gonna use a harness. If I'm doing a sport like bike journing where the dog is pulling you by the bike, or they're doing weight pull, which of course these are all specialized harnesses for a lot of these events. So don't go to like the pet store and buy yourself a harness and make your dog pull you by it on the bike. That's not a good idea. But these harnesses all make it really comfortable to pull. We got this nice big padded area here, so the dog's gonna be really comfy when they're pulling into that area. And I hear a lot of owners going, well, I don't want my dog to choke. If I put my dog on the collar, they choke. And my answer is dog training. They can also choke on the harness because there's still a strap here. You can still choke, just making it a little bit more comfortable for your dog to drag you down the neighborhood. Next up is going to be our flat collar. These again are great for having the dog pull into something. So this is a skinnier flat collar. This is more of a pet flat collar. They make thicker ones. I'm sure if you've ever seen like videos of police dogs or protection work, if you've spent some time on my page, you've probably seen some protection work dogs wearing these big leather agitation collars. It's all the same thing. This is very easy to pull into. It's very difficult to communicate to the dog with it, even though of course this collar is also huge on this little dog. But I can pull on this and I've got a little bit of directional pressure, but it's kind of just flat like that. It's like if I just kind of went like this, there's no pressure anywhere else. It's right on the delicate parts of the neck. The dog has the same delicate parts that you have, the voice box, the trachea, all of that stuff. So if you have a dog that's like a serial puller and you're putting them on this flat collar, over time you probably will see damage. And that's gonna honestly go for most of these tools. If you're not using it correctly, you're probably gonna see damage on the dog. Flat collars are still great for holding stuff like ID tags. Just make sure that when you are not handling the dog, that the dog is not wearing stuff that dangles, because it is very, very easy, and I've heard the stories of it happening. I've known people who's had it happen, where the ID tag gets stuck on a fence, it gets stuck on a piece of furniture, it gets stuck on the kennel, and the dog eventually strangles itself to death. So you do have to be very careful when you have things like ID tags and stuff hanging off of collars, and be really smart about taking that collar off before you leave your dog unsupervised. I also like flat collars as a backup collar, and we'll talk about that more when we get to our prong collars and star mark collars and stuff like that. But it is a good option as a backup collar or a way to have a handle on your dog if you're concerned about that. So after my flat collar is the Martingale collar, and this is actually a client's collar, so I'm going to try to cover up their ID tags and stuff just in case. So this is a really nice Martingale collar. It's nice and big. They have a very big dog. You can see it's got this chain action here. It's got this clip. I really like that this clip locks. You can see it's got like a little locky thingy there. I think that's a really nice collar. Basically, what the Martingale collar does, and this is again a step up from our flat collar, is I have the leash on this ring. The dog pulls forward and it's going to tighten. These are also known as greyhound collars. So these are great collars for a dog that's built kind of like this one almost, where you can see there's no like bumpy, like there's no difference between the skull and the neck. So if my dog kind of got freaked out or something and he went to pull out of the collar, even though this collar is huge on a stuffed dog, he still can't pull out of it because it's tightened around him when he pulls back. So it's a really great safety mechanism, because whereas the flat collar, the dog can easily pull out of it, the Martingale / greyhound collar, that is not something that can happen. So you'll see it on a lot of sight hounds like greyhounds, silken wind hounds, borzoi, stuff like that, because the flat collars will just fall right off their head. Up next, we are going to talk about slip leashes and command collars. So these are the same thing. It's just this one does not have a leash attached, and this one is a leash and collar all in one. The nice thing about these is it fits any dog. So if you have a million dogs of all sizes, it'll go from your Chihuahua all the way up to your Saint Bernard with the same exact leash. All of the dogs I get in for training will start on the slip leash. I do this for several reasons. For one, just like that Martingale / greyhound collar, if I put this slip leash on my stuffed dog sees something, he's like, oh my God, I'm out. He cannot slip out of this leash. So it's great for getting in new dogs that are maybe fearful and they want to try to get away from you. You are not going to have a loose dog on a slip leash. It is also a very, very important safety tool if you're handling an aggressive dog or a dog that's a little bit iffy and may possibly try to bite you. This is because if you're in a situation where the dog is either attempting to bite you or the dog already has a hold of you, you need a way to get that dog off fast and a way to control that dog. The slip leash is going to put very localized pressure right here because we want it to be nice, high, and tight. And it's going to actually make the dog choose biting you or air. And the dog is going to eventually go like, I gotta breathe, and he's going to let go of that human or that object or that dog and spit it out in order to get that air. Obviously, not a pretty scenario, not something we want to have happen, but if you're a dog trainer or someone that's handling some sketchy dogs, safety and the worst case scenario is always going to be something in the back of your head, so it's important to know what tools you can and can't use to defend yourself with that defensive handling. I also really like the slip leash for new dogs because it is going to apply pressure around the sides of the neck and less at the front. And I'll actually show you with the slip leash. So if I put it on correctly, if my dog heels on the left side, I want this to look like this on the dog. This way is the wrong way. And I'll show you why. Because if I have my dog on the left and we're heeling and I need to apply pressure, you can see it's pulling the side of the leash. If I have it this direction, it's pulling from the bottom of the leash because I'm gonna have it like this. So it's all coming like from the bottom. And if I put this on and I'm gonna heel on the left side because I'm a good dog, and I put this up nice, high, and tight, I can still talk to you semi-normal. I still have some pressure, and I'm putting a lot of tension on this, like more than I would with your average dog. Am I losing a little bit of oxygen? Yeah, my face is turning a little red. but you can hear my vocal cords are not being damaged like they would be with the flat collar, right? And if I put this on incorrectly, so if I'm trying to heal myself on the left side, I've just put this set up for the right, and I start pulling this way, you can instantly hear that it's like right there. And so that's why proper slip lead setup is very important. And that's why I feel like this is actually better if your dog pulls than the flat collar is going to be. I would rather make it, it's a little bit more uncomfortable because remember, we've got localized pressure instead of nice distributed pressure, but it's also not gonna damage all the delicate stuff at the front of your dog's neck. Either way, if your dog's pulling on the leash, again, with all of this stuff, you need to train them to walk on the leash. The command collar works the same way, but you have to attach a leash to it. This is great also as a backup for some of our correction collars, which we'll be getting into shortly, because it is not going to be in my way, and it's just an easy safety backup I can have on my dog. Downside to this is for my smaller breeds, it can be a little bit heavy because when you start getting the ring, the leather, and your leash clasp, this is going to be super heavy and it could possibly swing up and hit the dog if you're not being careful in your handling skills. Before we get to the fun stuff, because I feel like everyone comes to either hate or listen to the prong collars and the scary correction collars, I want to mention some other pieces of equipment. And I also want to add that I am not covering the electronic collar in this video. I just do not have the time today to make that long of a video, and I don't want to not do it justice. The e-collar will be covered in a different video at some other point. So this is a tab leash, so it's the same as any other regular leash, little clippy, everything. The benefit to this is if my dog has earned off-leash privileges, or maybe we're just kind of starting to get freedoms back in the house, and I don't want my dog to have to drag around a 6-foot leash that could get caught on something, but I still want to be able to have a handle on my dog. This tab leash is going to be great. For most dogs, it is not going to drag on the floor. They do come in different lengths and sizes, so if your dog is shorter, you can find a shorter one. But basically, if I'm out walking and I feel like I need to grab my dog, I already have a leash attached to them, but it's not like I have to handle it or anything like that when I don't want it. So the tab leash is super duper helpful. And you can buy these, or you can just make them if you have an older, rattier leash. You can just cut it. I also want to talk about the clicker. So this is a brand new fresh clicker in the bag. Lucky you. This one has like a little finger Velcro thingy. You're supposed to put it on your finger. I'm not doing all that right now because this is going right back in the bag. The clicker, the biggest misconception I see is that this is the TV remote, and I'm not going to click it because this one right here is going to be very upset if she does not get a reward when she hears that click. The clicker has to be trained just like everything else in this video. You have to load your clicker, and that's not going to be something I cover in this video, but I want y'all to know this does not do anything. You're not trying to get your dog's attention with the click. That's not what it's intended to be used for. It's intended to be used as a marker. So just like I can say good and then reward my dog, click and then reward my dog. But it's a really nice piece of equipment, especially when you're trying to build intensity and maybe a flatter dog. So a dog that's maybe not super enthusiastic, but we want to get some of that enthusiasm, make them a little less flat. The clicker can actually be great for a dog that's really looking for that dopamine hit. So next we're going to move to a Star Mark collar, and I feel like less people have heard about this one. So this is a large Star Mark collar. They come in 2 sizes that I'm aware of. Mine is a little bit muddy because I just took it hiking, so please ignore that. It is adjustable, so you just pull the little links apart. And it is actually classified as a martingale collar, and the prong collar is as well. The reason that is because of this function back here. You see it tightens and then it loosens. So this is a plastic collar, and it is great when a dog, they're not ready for the prong, the slip leash is kind of not great for them, and we're looking for that in-between place. I will always grab the Star Mark collar before I grab the prong collar to see how much pressure the dog really needs. It's a great way to gauge how far up in equipment that you want the dog to be. I always try to stay as low as possible, obviously because we want the equipment to be perfect for the dog, but also because it takes a little bit more skill to handle a dog with this versus with the slip leash. And that's because you can potentially do too harsh of a correction with these because it is a more adverse collar. And when we talk about localized pressure, so we talked about the slip lead, it goes like really small line around the neck. Now these collars, we're starting to get into where the pressure is at these little points. This should not cause physical damage to your dog. If this is causing physical damage to your dog, your handling is too rough, you need to not be doing that, or your dog does not know how to operate the equipment. Again, this is not going to save you and train your dog to walk on the leash. When I add in a more adversive collar, the dog already knows all their obedience commands. They're not learning how to heel on this collar. And you can see I'm still talking totally normal with it, even though I'm pulling it really hard. Yes, the points are uncomfortable. That is the point. But you can see the most I might have is maybe some red dots. I can't even see it, but you might. But pulling it as hard as possible did not break my skin, and I don't have fur. So it is not intended to harm the dog. I do not teach dogs how to heel, how to sit, all of that stuff on these aversive tools. I teach them on the slip leash, and then if we need a more sensitive tool, that's when we move up. Similar to the large Star Mark collar, we have the small Star Mark collar. This one's just a little bit thinner. You can see the difference here. So it's going to apply more pressure to those areas because it's smaller. Or if your dog is smaller, you know, certain breeds, this is just going to be ridiculous on. It's going to be too big, or it's going to not have enough links to fit the dog. So sometimes we will use the smaller Star Mark if the dog is too small. I highly recommend having a backup collar on with these because since the links can separate, you always run the risk of the collar kind of popping apart in public. So you always want to make sure you have a backup collar. That's where our command collars come in. You kind of you take your dog, you put your command collar on, then you put your correction collar on, and then you can see, of course, none of this is very sized to the dog, but then you can see I have my leash attached to both. If I was to make a correction or something, the blue collar is not getting any pressure on it. It's just this black one, but if for some reason my collar fails, I still have my dog. My dog cannot run away. So it's a really nice idea to have a safety backup, especially when you're in public and the dog could possibly get scared and run into traffic or be disruptive or something like that. So now we'll talk about prongs. There are two main sizes of prong collar that I will use. That's going to be the 3mm and the 2.25. So this is the 3mm. This is the big one. They do have sizes bigger than this. Honestly, I find that they're kind of not super useful unless you have an absolutely ginormous dog that's still sensitive, but I've found very, very few dogs in that category. So if I need a bigger one, I'll get a bigger one, but for the most part, between the Star Marks and these prongs, I can get anywhere I need to be. So the prong collar is great if the handler needs leverage. Talking the handler cannot make a correction on the dog with the slip leash adequately. Like maybe they're like a 100-pound female older person and the dog is like 120 pounds and a little bit of a turd. You're not going to get very far on the slip leash or the harness because again, it comes down to a little bit of safety. And if that dog for some reason got a wild hair and said, hey, I'm gonna say screw you and I'm gonna go across the street, the person that can't handle the dog isn't going to be able to handle the dog. They're going to be taken for a ride across the pavement. And of course we don't want that because it's very unsafe. And in that scenario, of course, impulse control training should be a part of their program. The downside of the prongs, there are many downsides to all of these tools, but there's also many upsides. So a big downside is that it's very difficult for a lot of clients to use these. It's a little bit confusing at first. Sometimes you'll see people walk around with them like this. Do not be that person, that's so dangerous because look how easy it is for me to pull it off. It can be very difficult to put this on and off. There are things you can put on here to make it easier, like a quick release, which you'll see on my other prong collar. So squeezing these together and putting them in the holes can be a little bit difficult for some handlers. If the dog's a little bit wiggly, it can be a little bit difficult. Occasionally you'll see them like inside out or all kinds of crazy ways. People get very creative with the prong collar. So there's a lot of misuse and misinformation surrounding it. Another big issue that the prong collar and the Star Mark collar as well can have is that it feels like teeth on neck. And I've actually had a trainer that I knew before tell me when I had an aggressive dog that I should just put a prong collar on it and correct the dog. That is the worst piece of advice you could give someone when they're working a human aggressive dog. Dogs are very think in the moment animals, and they're always going to default to whatever is the most natural. And with a dog, especially already an aggressive dog that's a little bit nervous and insecure, defensive aggression, instant decision right there. Like, I'm just gonna bite the hell out of you and get you out of my way, because in their mind, I just bit them on the neck. So this feels a lot like teeth on neck. So it's really not a good item if you have a dog that is easily over aroused, like it's trying to get at the dog across the street the second you walk out the front door. This is going to cause more stress to the situation than help. Honestly, what I would recommend in that situation would be the slip leash, because I can control the dog's air. At certain situations where the dog is in such a state of like, I'm seeing red and I'm gonna freaking get that thing, the prong collar is not gonna be our best bet, because it's making the dog go, oh my God, I am in trouble because now I'm getting injured. Like, injured. This should not cause actual injury to your dog. And another issue I do see with the prong collars is the links will separate every now and then. There's always like some time where the prong pops, just equipment failure. And that's why we use the backup collar, just like I showed with the Star Mark, to make sure that if that was to happen, we still have control of the dog and everyone stays really safe. So my most adversive collar is going to be my 2.25 prong. This one is powder coated black because it's my personal dog's collar. This one has the quick release on it, so it's very easy to take off and on. Only downside is you'll see I do not have prongs going over here, but for my dog that is not an issue because her neck is big enough that we have multiple on the sides. Again, we're talking about localized pressure, so this is obviously going to be a lot closer together, smaller pressure points than this one. So even squeezing into my hand, they feel very different. These are also classified as martingale collars because they have this little tightening mechanism. So the swivel one, this is where you want to connect your leash. You do not want to connect your leash to this flat little circle one that has the little tag on it. Additionally, do not go cheap on prong collars. If you've determined that the prong collar is what your dog needs, or your trainer has determined that's what your dog needs, the only brand of prong collar that I trust is Herm Springer. And I do not make any money from them. They are a very popular company. They do not need my advertisement, whatever. But that is the only brand I trust because they take very good care in making sure that there is nothing harmful on this collar that could potentially hurt my dog. They really bevel the corners of these individual prongs to make sure nothing can actually cut into the neck. You'll also see that these go two separate ways. So we have the trachea plate on both of these collars. So this one's got the original trachea plate that it came with. This one has the buckle. And you'll notice the prongs go separate ways after that trachea plate. So they go outwards from each other. This is important because we want that pressure very evenly dispersed around the dog's neck. Some of the pet store collars that only go one way, everything is pushing to one side. And that's gonna not give me very even pressure distribution, and that can actually cause some damages and some issues as well. Also with the cheaper collars, you can get like bad metals in them, stuff that's gonna turn your dog's fur a funny color. Your dog might be allergic to those metals. These are stainless steel, so they will not rust, they will not get yucky, and they're just very high quality pieces of equipment. Especially when you start getting to corrective tools and stuff, you don't wanna cheap out on your equipment. You want to be buying stuff that is reliable, safe, and something you can use for years and years without having to rebuy it. And of course, my Star Mark collars are Star Mark brand because that is their patented collar. So we'll talk a little bit about why I might decide a dog needs a specific piece of equipment. As a dog trainer, as you get more experienced in dog training, if there's like baby trainers or something watching this, you kind of get to the point where you handle the dog for a little bit and you're like, I know the dog is probably going to end up on this specific piece of equipment. You can typically just kind of feel how sensitive the dog is and tell from there what the dog might need in the future. But again, I'm not training a lot of behaviors on these correction collars. And if I am training a behavior on it, it's a very specific reason that I'm using that collar. A lot of the dogs I train, the reason I send them home on what I send them home on has a lot to do with the handler and their relationship to the dog. I make sure my handlers have really good understanding of the equipment before I send dogs home on it. I make them practice with me putting it on and off. I make them practice using it as a corrective tool, all of that stuff to make sure they're going to handle it correctly. However, no matter how much you kind of talk to handlers and how many lessons you give, there's always going to be that disconnect of I've been doing this for like 4 or 5 years and they just did a 1-hour lesson with me. That's just how it is. I cannot download my brain into theirs. So typically if I have a dog and maybe it might work best on a large prong or a star mark collar or something, but I can get them to work pretty well on the slip leash, I'll probably send them home on the slip leash, especially if it's an owner that's having a little bit more trouble understanding a lot of the concepts, or maybe you can kind of tell they have a little less patience or a little less willingness to learn a lot of the stuff. I'm much more likely to send them home on the slip collar because they give that harder correction and the dog is not going to mind it as much as they would if it was on their corrective collar. As a dog trainer, I'm really good about changing my correction levels, right? I can do a very light correction that the dog can barely feel. And if I really, really wanted to, I could probably make a correction that would make a dog cry. Not that I would do that, not that I have done that. I'm good at giving corrections, I guess, is the big thing here. Owners don't have that skill. They're not going to be very good at pressure levels and deciding, okay, this scenario, the dog did this, so I'm going to give them this level correction. That's just not how it's going to go. There's a reason they're paying me to train their dog, right? So I try to send them home on the least aversive piece of equipment that the dog can be successful on. Obviously, I don't want to send them home geared up for failure, but I want to try to make everyone as successful as I can in the most humane way possible. And sometimes that is going to end up being, you know, your dog might be on a prong or a star mark collar in training, but they're coming home on a lower level collar. And I know I'm not really talking about e-collars in this video, but that is one of the benefits to the e-collar is that I don't have to worry about the level of correction the handler's giving. I just have to tell them a number and they know that they can put that number up, they can put that number down, and that correction will always be a constant same level as long as they're on the same level of the e-collar. So that can be a benefit of that. Overall, I want the big takeaway here to be that, you know, don't pay for crap because it says it's going to magically fix your dog. We're not going to find any miracles over there. Don't be afraid of the tools and stuff that everyone labels online as evil, abusive things. A lot of the photos and stuff you see of prong collar injuries, I'm sure if you Google it, you will see a million horrific things. That's people not using it correctly. Right? I can drive my car and be fine, but I can also drive my car really incorrectly and cause a lot of damage to people and property. So just like anything else, it's using it properly and being educated on that item. Obviously, any of these tools, slip collar, flat collar, prong collar, any of it, don't leave it on your dog unsupervised. They're gonna get stuck in something and it's gonna freaking cause damage physically and mentally. So let's not do that. There's nothing wrong and there's nothing shameful with working a dog on a corrective piece of equipment that works for that dog. As long as you're training them humanely and you're using the equipment the way it's meant to be used and everyone's safe and your dog is happy and having a good time, there's nothing wrong with equipment. And if you're unsure about something, talk to a trainer. Go take a few lessons from a trainer. The best thing you can do for any equipment, whether you are using the harness, anything like that, is to teach your dog to walk on the leash. It is not a natural skill. And if you do any research on opposition reflex, you'll see why pulling on the leash is such a common dog problem. And you'll also understand why adversive equipment is not going to solve the dog pulling on the leash. The adversive equipment, it should be thought of as you turning up the volume on your phone. The slip leash might be volume 1 and I can barely freaking hear it because maybe my ears don't work so good. But maybe the large prong collar is like volume 7 and I can hear really well for volume 7. And if you moved me up to volume 10, that might be too loud. That might be too much. And I will not like that because it'll be too loud for me. All in all, Go train your freaking dog. Don't go buy stuff off Instagram, and don't listen to everyone. If you feel unsure about something, go get a second opinion by another trainer. The pet market in general, and I'm talking equipment, trainers, groomers, vets, everybody is a huge industry, and it's very, very lucrative. It is a very big industry, and that can lead to a lot of people that should not be in it getting into it to make a quick buck. So the more skeptical you are, the better off you're gonna be. Don't trust anyone just for what they say. Ask for proof of training videos. Ask for social media links. Look at their social media. Is every single dog going home on the 2.25 prong collar? That tells me your trainers might be a little bit lazy or just not know what they're doing. See how the dogs look. Are they looking happy in training? Are they looking super flat? Is it every single dog looking super flat? Because of course there's gonna be cases where the dog is a little bit unhappy. Most of the time they're being sent to training for a reason. But absolutely do your research on all of the tools, all of the trainers, everything you do. Stay skeptical and go train your freaking dog.